Welcome to Eden Church.
I want to speak into stuff. We're in this season of preparing ourselves for change, preparing ourselves for Ekklesia, preparing ourselves for moving towards the church Jesus intended rather than the one we've inherited. And last week we opened that up really in a big way by trying to rip out our Christian conditioning. All that religious stuff, the bad religious stuff that has just consumed us and formed us. And a lot of that's in us. And so today and next week, I want to do something a little bit different. And it's quite hard to get across in a morning, but I'm going to do my very, very best for you. I want to get across that actually we also need to rip out our cultural conditioning. Okay? So we have, in the West, a problem, a big problem. A cultural conditioned, we are from what I would call selfish individualism. We are a heavily individualistic society, heavily focused in that way. So, what do I mean by that? Well, we tend to see everything through the lens of me, myself, and I. We interpret everything that happens, even around the world, that has nothing to do with us, on an individual basis. And there's three key character traits of selfish individualism. Some, if not all, you will recognize in yourself, if not in the world. Firstly, we have something called entitlement. This is becoming more and more of an issue with newer generations, and will continue to get worse unless we kind of address it. It's that situation where actually we believe that we're entitled to various rights and various things, even though we haven't earned it. Okay, and that's not necessarily ultimately a bad thing, but the way we interpret that data isn't always helpful. It also creates a sense of just selfishness. I guess it's a Darwinist thing, it's a self-protection mode. We want to make sure our environment is controlled and feels safe, and we don't tend to be a people that really put ourselves out there for something that isn't worth it. Okay. There's also the last thing is a victim mentality, which is just utterly rife throughout all of us, actually, but particularly in our Western world. And so we've kind of adopted these situations because it's easier to accept ourselves when it's someone else's fault, even if it was our own doing. It's also easier to blame other people. It's always easier to make out someone else is worse because it makes us feel better, all those kind of insinuations. There's a few things I've pointed out here that I think are interesting that I've challenged myself with over the years. So poverty and those that are deprived in our world and our society, we quite often blame the government, normally the Tories, which is absolutely fine. That's a political prerogative of all of us. But what's interesting about that is a lot of people that get really intense about it, I communicate with them. I say, well, what is your individual plan to support those in need in your spheres of influence? Do you know what? No one has one. It's someone else's problem, but we're passionate about it, but we don't actually do anything necessarily about it. It's an interesting concept. We also demand our rights are met. So there's something now called, which I'm sure you're aware of because of Donald Trump, but cancel culture. It's this idea actually if someone has a different opinion than us, it can offend us, and we want that opinion shut down. So what I've seen numerous times is not just a media thing, it's an individual thing. We will try and assassinate that character just because we don't like them or don't agree with them. It's just a weird thing that takes place. And ultimately, when it puts us out of our comfort zone, we're more reluctant, to help other people when it puts ourselves out. So this selfish Western individualism is rife in society. It's not a new thing. It's not a new thing. So going out, looking at society and history, you may have come across something called the witch trials, roughly 13th to 17th, 18th century. And it's such a crazy idea that you can see why they did it, right? So if there's unexplained sickness or unexplained storms, well, they want to come up with a solution. So clearly it's going to be a woman's fault who happens to be over 40 in the town that surely she's a witch, and if we get rid of her, all our problems are going to go away. That's legit. We can go to slightly more recent history, look at Germany. After World War One, they signed the Versailles Treaty, because they had to, obviously, because they lost the war. But the amount of reparations they had to pay was astronomical. It was almost impossible. It was never going to happen. And so there's this blame, and there's this guilt, and there's this shame culture that eventually kind of creates this hatred for many different reasons, including the historic assumption of the wealthy Jews, that leads to one of the greatest and worst atrocities the world's ever seen in the Holocaust. So you see that these things come up, and then more recently, Donald Trump, well, he's to blame for everything, isn't he? Joe Biden, fine, not a problem, because he's not particularly a big personality. Donald Trump, we can't stand the guy. He's the reason I had a nosebleed this morning. Kind of, you with me? Kind of, oh, we are. This is good. There's many away, but you're louder than normal. May everyone else stay away. No, that's a joke. And I think one of the reasons that actually we tend to adopt this Western individualism, this selfishness, is actually because it absolves us of having to take responsibility. It absolves us of having not just to take responsibility, but it means that we're comfortable. We tend to live a more comfortable life with that in regards. And I want to go to the scriptures now, if that's okay. We're going to do a bit of psychology, but particularly want to go to the scriptures, because this flight from responsibility that I want to talk to you about originated right at the beginning of humanity. So I want to walk you through this a little bit, because when God created us, he said quite a key word. He said it is not good for man to be alone. Individualism is not a kingdom concept. It's not a God concept. We were meant to be a family walking with him and one another. And so individualism isn't just the problems that I've come up with, it's a hugely spiritual problem. And so if we go right back to the beginning, I want to go to Genesis 3, 9 to 12. It says this: the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, "I heard you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" The man said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it." Then the Lord said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me and I ate." Notice that both of them blamed somebody else. Weren't me, Gov. I was con, Gov. It's my mate's fault, Gov. It was Eve's fault, the snake's fault, anybody's fault but my fault. You see, like our individualistic world, actually, Adam and Eve failed to take personal responsibility. It's someone else's issue. And notice, if you were here last week, the fact that these situations drop from one generation to the next. So their firstborn son, Cain, here, in this situation, we experience not just the first tragic instance of sibling rivalry, but the first murder. Chapter 4, 8 to 10. Then Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. This is intense. And the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" It's not because he didn't know. It's like as if he didn't know why they were naked in the garden. "I do not know," he answered. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done?" Do you notice the correlation between the text that we just read? And he says, "What is this you have done?" to Eve. And now he says, "What have you done?" Listen, and this is intense. We could spend a while on this. "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Wow. So here, Cain, it's not like he doesn't take personal responsibility. I think in a way he does and he doesn't. He doesn't say it wasn't me, but what Cain does here is he denies moral responsibility. He's like, well, I mean, really, it's probably the most selfish statement in history. He says, well, am I my brother's keeper? In other words, well, his welfare has nothing to do with me. He offended me. I killed him. That's his fault. Wow. What a statement. Is anyone else's welfare more important? I mean, this is quite a huge, significant statement for Cain to make. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure we're that different from him. Not that I'm expecting that we go around murdering people. Kudos for when you don't do that. That's great. That's really important. They're probably pretty good at not murdering people. But, hello? Don't panic me there. if there's any point in this meeting, don't do that. But this individualism, it's not just a world problem. It's not just a Western problem in particular. It's actually a Western church problem. It's infiltrated us to a huge degree, and I'm obviously going to try and convince you that being the case, because we are led more by society than by Scripture. We are conformed more by culture than we are by Christ. Okay, and that's why this isn't working. And we'll look at that even in more detail next week about what's happened to the church, why it looks like it does, and how it needs to shift and change. Now, there's many reasons I could pick right now to try and help us understand that actually our church is conditioned more by culture than by Christ. But one of them, and Western selfish individualism, one of them was the pandemic. So some of you will know that I was responsible, I resigned, so that's a joy, from a role where I was overseeing and pastoring 40-odd pastors in the locality down from Bristol up to North Birmingham, which was an impossible role. But during the pandemic, I mean, if I had hair, I would have pulled it out. Okay? It was excruciatingly painful. So what happened was we exhibited church, hopefully not here, those three things: entitlement, a victim mentality, and utter selfishness during the pandemic. This is tend to be what happened. So the government asked us not to sing. That's what they asked. They said, like, meet, but don't sing. And then they said, can you shut down for a little period of time? Now, three things happened during the pandemic, which I tried to navigate with a lot of grace and tell people off. So, firstly, a lot of people, Christians, felt entitled. How dare they tell us not to sing? Okay. Right. They became victims, actually. The amount of times I heard this is a conspiracy. I'm not joking. Genuinely brilliant people who lead decent-sized churches and modern church, all this. Well, I think this is a conspiracy. If we accept this, we'll never be open again, and all this stuff. So that was common. I don't know if you picked that up where you were. We tried to protect our church from that because it's just utter nonsense, according to me and our team. But this is what was going on. And then we really got the hump about this. But as I looked and I prayed about this particular situation, I thought, actually, all the government are asking us to do is for a short period of time to not sing, because singing and churches have been proven to be super-spreading events. So the government's just asking us, would you, for a short period, love your neighbour? Well, we really struggle with that because we weren't allowed to sing. The church is shut. Well, church isn't a meeting. Church isn't singing. Church is people. It's a body. It's a family. And if we shut down Sundays and we're not operating in the world, we have a bigger problem. One of the reasons that church needs to change. And so you can see that actually what happened was, but I think because of this, we've developed a Christianity, a Churchianity, if you like, that I call it playing it safe. I think church is very safe. And I think that's we've embraced that and adopted that because of the culture around us. So yes, we absolutely are encouraged to serve projects and to bless our communities. That's encouraged. That's a good thing. And we fully endorse that. However, what has happened because of individualism is we have somehow agreed to separate our faith life and our world life. Now, some of you are sat here saying, well, I don't do that. Yeah, you do, actually. We all do this to varying different levels and different seasons bring out different things. Rarely do we actually combine our church world with our world. So we separate our family and our friends and our work and our social life from our church world. From gathering together, Bible studies, praying together, all that stuff. Actually, they are separate. Now, internally, you might think you're not doing that. Internally, you might think, actually, no, I'm a prayerful person. I pray regularly for the people. That's great. That's fantastic. That's a good thing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that God asked us to merge those two worlds. He wants us to muddy those two worlds so that your life isn't compartmentalized between your faith and your world life. And I call that the flight from responsibility that I'm going to get into now. So we tend to do those two worlds. And that basically leads to this, that the goal of the Christian life, in reality, I'd say 90% of it at least, 90% of Christians in the West, we have two goals. Stay right with God, be a good person. Fundamentally, I suppose that is taking personal responsibility and moral responsibility. They're the things that we feel that we need to do and we need to behave. We need to keep right standing with God. We need to be a good person to those around us. We need to stay in God's love, even though we never earned it in the first place. Now, they're not bad things. But if that's the goal, we are missing the point of the gospel, the point of Christ's coming. Bridget was, we're talking, Dave and Bridget, about this, and she mentioned that actually it reminded her of the Good Samaritan. I think she's right. So let's just look at that for a second at Luke 10, 30 to 33. Many of you will know this. It says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live, you will have life. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbour? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. The priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he travelled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. The key here is that the Levite and the priest believed in the defilement law that if you touched anything unclean or anything dying, you were defiled in God. So you didn't take the risk, because what mattered to you was your right standing with God. You needed to obey the religious system, the religious law, just in case that happened. And Jesus is like, Muppets, no, don't do that. I mean, if the word Muppet was around then, I'm sure it would be in the Gospels quite a lot. You Muppets, be better than you brood of vipers. Let's see Jesus. So this Samaritan, an alleged enemy of the Jews, is the hero of the story, and that's the beauty of Jesus. And again, I don't know if we're much different today. I think most of us, all of us, would help that individual, someone who'd been completely beaten up and in a mess and needed our help. But when you look at us as an organisation, as a church, what's interesting is you learn a lot about people from what angers them, what annoys them, what actions they take. And we are, as someone once said, we are the only organisation that shoots our wounded. So when someone messes up, how dare they not be a good person? How dare their life not be perfect? And that's a problem, because it sends and reinforces this message of individualism. It says that actually your goal in life is to be a good person, raise perfect kids that don't make a sound, don't run on the stage, make sure your finances are okay, make sure you read the Bible, make sure you serve at church, make sure you're at church every single week without fail, otherwise you are backslidden, and etc., etc. And so by and large, that's the standard of Christian. And if you're not doing it, if you're beyond that, well done, you can give yourself a pat on the back. You're a super Christian, you're a spiritual Christian, because you go beyond that basic level. But actually, I would argue that's probably most churches. That's the message that we are trying to send out to people. And it results in us having a church, and can I be even more honest, not that we do this here particularly, but it results in us having a church where the leadership focus on trying to educate the people, keeping them happy and keeping them safe. Because if they don't do that, those people who go to the church down the road that will do that, that will educate them, that will pastor and look after them, everything else. Which is great in some way, but not if it's run by professionals. But we'll get to that in this series. And now I know that if you've been here a while, you know that hopefully this is teaching to suck eggs a little bit because we're getting somewhere. But that isn't why God saved us. God didn't save us to stay safe. Okay? God didn't save us to rescue us from the world until he came back. No, he saved us to recruit us to save the world around us. Okay? That's what Jesus did. We've talked about that for a number of years here.